but welcome to the sort of second part of our course. And it's very much a follow-up to what Alex did last week, because it's still concentrating very much on the French in 15. And I know last week will have been very much them in the 14 period of time. And that's really a nice place to start, because this next hour is going to be all about what was 1915 about in terms of the French, in terms of the Great War, and in terms of development, especially development of the French army. If people were in my course on the whole of the French army last year sometime, then some of the early part of it will be a little bit of revision, but it's very useful to revise some of the ideas that I'll be talking about in terms of the move from 1914 to 15 for the French, because it means we can analyse the battles we're going to analyse this afternoon in a much more knowledgeable way in terms of analysing what happened, why it happened, and what didn't happen and why it didn't happen. It's that sort of analysis based upon the sort of things I talked about last year, and I'll be talking about at the beginning. So apologies if people have seen one or two of the slides before. It does cover that sort of particular area. So it carries on all about this man, Joffre, because you'll have heard a lot about him last week. By now, as we enter 1915, he quite rightly should have gone, in essence. He was saved by the First Battle of the Marne. It wasn't just France that was saved, Paris saved, all of the various acclamations that were stated at the time after the First Battle of the Marne, but it saved his skin. He did react well down there after horrific planning in the first place, horrific management of the armies during the sort of August period of time, but he pulled it out of the bag at the Marne, and it saved him. You could say it saved him for too long, because he then keeps his role as commander-in-chief of the whole French army all the way to the end of 16. And so he keeps it for all the way through 15, all the way through 16, when to some extent, maybe some of the new people should have been coming in. Once his skin had been saved, once he realised he was okay, he then went about something that I think politicians still do these days. He said, well, I'm okay, but I'm going to actually make sure the blame is never put onto me historically. And he then rid his army of something like around a third of his army, corps, and divisional generals, and even some brigade generals. And whole new people were brought in. He more than decimated it. It's far more than 1 in 10, more like a third. So his survival led to total dismissal, limoged, as it's termed in French, because the odd person who was removed of their command was often sent to Limoges, the place in France, on a. But if everybody had gone there, it'd have been full of lots of very old generals muttering about Joffre and muttering about why they'd lost their jobs. So a lot of people did, but most of those who lost their job deserved to. The French started with a large general staff, a large number of generals who were very old. Some of them almost from the 1870s, the war there against the German Empire. And it was good that he basically put that new broom in. And we're going to see some of the new people he brought in, or that came up because of that ridding of quite a lot of generals. But not only did he do that, but this is where I come back to what I talked about last year. There was a reaction to that disaster of August, and not disaster in September. They stopped the Germans on the Marne, they pushed them back, but they didn't push them back very far. I think that's what's got to be remembered there. However much it was a stop, the Germans have failed. And Alex talked about that. I'm not going into details why and wherefore they failed, but what happened then was that they pushed them back just a little bit to the end, and then the race to the sea, and the line solidified. So it wasn't more than saving Paris, really. It wasn't actually then moving it to a war-winning footage. So Joffre did so much, but not that great a deal. But as that time rolled on, as 14 ended and 15 came in, they had looked at what had happened. They didn't just say, oh, well, it all went wrong, but we'll try again, and we'll use exactly the same way. They moved on. And their reaction was this. So, termed the famous Note 5779. It wasn't out until April, but it was based upon a lot of work that had gone on all the way through the first part of 15. And it's got this long French idea of bout de condition and so on. But it's how to carry out an offensive action, how to attack. It had been seen that the attacks that had happened in August and even some into September, October were just machines to kill people. They weren't really gaining a great deal of objectives, and it was just wholesale destruction of their infantry mostly. And so it was really a matter of, what have we got to change? And it's a really, really important document to work through, especially if you follow the British Army through the rest of the war and its development. And there is a big question which you can sort of think about as we talk through the battles that we're going to talk about, of why didn't we do that? Why didn't we learn from that? Why did it take us so long to learn some things? So keep that in mind, because 5779 covers quite a number of things which the British Army took some time to learn about. Now, one of the things they didn't have to learn about was the fact that you need a little bit more preparation than the French did in August. In August, it was like, send a corps in a certain direction and they'll go and it will all be okay. And that's not what happened. It was a disaster, as you heard last week. And Joffre himself had realised this, and he saw that, and he had people around him who thought the same sort of way. And I've named Foch and Pétain there because they begin to take more influence. Foch already has influence, but Pétain himself also begins to take influence, and you see him a lot through 1915. And so I'll put him in there on the methodical part. But more than anything else, it's artillery. 5779 changes how artillery is used. At the beginning of the war, all the stuff you heard last week from Alex, the artillery goes up with the infantry. It's basically Napoleonic-style artillery. You roll the 75s as near as you can to the enemy, and you blast at the enemy. You try and do that. But then they're trying to fire, and it's quick firing. They're supposed to be able to fire 15 rounds a minute. If they do, their barrels blow up. And so all sorts of things have to be changed. It's all right designing a gun that can do that sort of rapid fire, but if it then damages the gun, they lost hundreds of 75s through damage, self-inflicted damage, not through enemy damage, over the period up to beginning of 1915. So they changed that. But what was more important, they changed the role of artillery. It suddenly became what we now know it as in the Great War. That is a supporting arm that's out of sight a bit further back. And how far back, depending on the range of the guns. So you'd have the field artillery a little bit further back. You'd have heavier artillery further back than that. So that changed what the artillery was going to do. And it actually defined things like the rolling barrage. Now, can't remember if there's any Canadians on here today, but this really does take away this idea of the Canadians invented the rolling barrage at Arras in 17, because the French were actually already using it in May 15. They also brought in the idea of counter-battery fire, that, in fact, you cannot just allow the enemy just to fire off willy-nilly. You have to actually try to suppress the enemy as well. And this emphasis between infantry and artillery liaison. So that change came about during the early part of 1915. But we'll talk a little bit more about what effect that had on the actual battles that we'll look at in a battle situation as opposed to just theoretically later on. Now, why did they have to attack in the first place? There are arguments that would say that the French, once it had gone wrong in 14, and then once the British were involved, should really have sat back and said, well, hang on a minute, the UK are recruiting massively. They're going to have a much, much bigger army within about a year or so. Why not just go on the defensive, not lose any more France, and save our troops, wait until the British have something like around 3 armies within France instead of just 1, and actually then go on the offensive? Well, they couldn't. And it's politically impossible for them to do that. So all of 15 has to be seen politically under the idea that Joffre had no choice but to plan offensives. He had no choice but to try and take back the big chunks of France that were under German occupation. Britain's never been under occupation. We don't know really what it feels like. The French had. There were lots of people who'd experienced 1870 with the Germans running riot all around France. And many of them felt, we've lost parts of our country again. We can't put up with this. So Joffre was under intense pressure to attack. So all of 15 has to be seen in that way. And also because of the Russians. The Russians had all sorts of topsy-turvy all through 14 and into 15, and they do so all the way through 15 as well. They seem to do well for every now and then. They do well enough that the Germans have to move corps to the east, which perhaps leads to the first Marne being as successful as it was. But then again, they have some success, but then they have to be supported by the French. If the French had just said, can you hold them warm? Can you hold them busy for a while? We're just waiting for the Brits to arrive. It would not have worked politically. So that's the background to what 15 is all about. A change in idea, but not in a change of the idea that it has to be attack and more attacks, and we have to keep attacking. We have to keep the initiative. So that is reaction of that sort. Now, people who saw me last time remember this map in terms of what happened during 15 and 16 for the French. I've cut out some of the 16 bits, although the map still has them in here. But 15, let's just look at 15 as a whole first, and the different things that happen, and then talk about where we're going to focus in. 15 actually starts already in the early part of 15 with the French involved down there in the Champagne area. What's called the First Battle of Champagne is still going on, but it is not really a planned offensive. It's still part of that period of time where the attacks have been going on further and further north until the line was solid, and the French just continued to attack in the Champagne, hoping to make some sort of progress. But it's all very bitty. There's no real proper planned offensive, even though it's termed the First Champagne, and it drags into March. But I've chosen not to look at that particular one because that is a little bit too sort of fluffy, really. Joffre, at this point, is wanting a major offensive, and his eyes turn to the area which is termed Artois, and I'll talk about that area and what it means first on. And he's going to attack in the Artois, but that's delayed or put on hold for a little while because the Germans attack in Ypres, the Second Battle of Ypres, the gas attack, as people tend to know it as. That wasn't really a major offensive by the Germans, but it caused a lot of angst for the Allies. The French, Foch in the north, had to send quite a lot of troops up there just in case it was a major attack, in case the Germans followed it up. It dislodged some of Joffre's plans for a while, but not for much and not for long. And so in May, we're going to look at the area there, which is the second battle of Artois. There was a first battle of Artois, which again we're not going to look at in too much detail because it's part really of the race to the sea conflict going on late 14 and just into 15. The second battle of Artois, May through to June of 15, and we're going to be back at that. And then the two attacks, which you see two came up there, one in the Artois, which is the third battle of Artois, and then one in the Champagne again, which is the second battle of Champagne. So that is 15 in a nutshell for the French. Obviously, the British were attacking as part of these as well. And I'll talk more about that when we talk about the Artois, because that's what we're going to concentrate on, because today is going to be the French in the Artois. And that's this area here. It's got the big red ring around it. It's the Artois battles, the second battle of Artois, and the third battle of Artois. We're going to concentrate on those and see how they were carried out and look at whether the French had actually learned from 14, how much that learning had taken them forward, and how much further did they still have to go, and how the Germans were reacting to that. And that's basically what we're going to be doing during this next 3/4 of an hour or so. Now, let's have a look at some of the thoughts about 15. I showed this the last time as well because it is an important one, again, for people who are reading around the subject to ensure that they're careful about what some people think about 15 and think about it, because this is a fairly recent one, Clayton. It's about the French army, 14 to 18, but as far as he was concerned, they didn't do anything in 15, as he describes here. As far as he was concerned, there was no progress by the French whatsoever. They just kept attacking, they all failed, they didn't get anywhere, and he makes no analysis whatsoever of anything to do with their learning that they've been carrying out, changes in tactics, changes in this, whatever. He just basically almost writes it off. And Doughty and one or two of the other people, they're a little bit, in Paths to Glory, in Doughty's book, it's a little bit more sympathetic, but again, he doesn't cover much. He doesn't talk about 15 very much. He doesn't discuss the battles in great detail. So a lot of the literature on the French in 15 is not good in terms of it doesn't put them in a very good light at all. And I'm hoping I've balanced that a little bit today. I'm hoping that And there's only Jonathan Krauser, really, who's balanced it in the same way I'm doing. And he and I are on the same wavelength in terms of the French in 15 and how they developed. So with that in mind, let's start looking at some of the people involved. You've already seen Joffre as commander-in-chief. Now, Ferdinand Foch was, in 14, was not in command of an army or even a corps at all. He was assistant commander-in-chief. So he was next in line to Joffre. Now, when Joffre survived, and Foch had been given an army during First Marne, he was given a new army, Ninth Army, to plug in the gap as in the south, and he wasn't a very able tactician. And Joffre had a lot of respect for Foch. So basically, in 15, he made him Northern Army Group Commander. Now, that might seem so you're second in command of the whole commander-in-chief, and then all you've got is an army group. Is that a demotion? Well, no, because Northern Army Group is basically where Joffre was thinking his attacks were going to go in. So he's putting his 2IC in charge of the armies that were going to be part of his attacks in 15. On the opposite side, you've got Ruprecht, because the opposing troops in the Artois were part of the Germans' 6th Army. And the Germans don't move their armies around very well. Neither the French or the Germans move their armies around very much. So you'll find the 6th Army actually sits basically around Arras for the whole of the war. Every time you look at anything around Arras or in the Artois, you're fighting the 6th Army. He was commander of the 6th Army at this particular point, all the way through the campaign in 15. He is the army chief. And it's not until 16, actually, that he's made army group commander. And he takes over a number of groups. So all the fighting in 17 and 18, he's actually in charge of 4 or 5 armies. But a very able man, very sort of noble man. He's Crown Prince of Bavaria. If his father had died earlier, he would have been, in a sense, the king of Bavaria. It's quite a family, really, because it's the Wittelsbach family. And they are descendants of the Stuarts, in fact. Ruprecht, at this point, if it hadn't been for the Act of Succession, would have had a certain number in line. They were Catholics. So the Act of Succession in Britain meant they couldn't be in line for the throne. But in terms of they are direct descendants of the Stuarts, James Stuart. And all of this family are the Wittelsbach. The present family now in Bavaria would still, if they weren't Catholics, would have still, during the 20th century, be in line for the throne. And I think they can be now, but they're a long way down the line. But there's that connection. Very able man. He had his role as 6th Army commander because of his position as Crown Prince of Bavaria. Luckily, unfortunately for the Germans, they just happened to come across somebody who had read a great deal about military history, a great deal about tactics, was a very able tactician and a very able leader of an army and an army group later on as well. But also a very noble type character. Just his background after the war, he survives the war, obviously, and he is basically, he's chased out of Germany because he hates the Nazis. His family is actually put into a concentration camp during the Second World War. He's not, he escapes, but his family is. They survive that. But his wife, unfortunately, only survives for a few years after the end of the war. She was made so ill by being in the concentration camp, and he died in 1955. But he died and had in Bavaria a state funeral, as if he was king. So that's the opposition, a very able man in the opposition. That's why it's important for him to be brought in mind. It's French 10th Army that we're going to be looking at. It's always 10th Army, all the way through 15, fighting in the Artois. We never talk about any other army. And it's always going to be General Victor Dubois, who's in charge of that army. Now, look at his war so far. He's a divisional commander at the beginning of the war. He takes over a corps within weeks of the beginning of the war, and he takes over an army not a great deal longer after that. A typical rapid rise. But he finds it difficult to accept some of the new ideas. He's still of that pre-war, we attack all costs, we've just got to burst through, you keep going, you throw men at it until we go. So he had fallings out with Foch, fallings out with some of his core people as well, core commanders, and it's not an easy relationship, but he is all the way through the war. By the end of 15, he's not in favour anymore, and he ends the war not really rising anymore and he loses 10th Army, and he's given just another role in the general staff. So he's not. He causes more problems than he solves when it comes to 1915 in the Artois. They're the three major characters together. There's Joffre inspecting his troops going past with Foch behind him and Durbal just behind him. You'll see the sort of, we're going through a sort of competition of moustaches through this one. We make your own mind up who you think of these characters who've got the best of the moustaches. But it was a thing of the time. You couldn't be a French. And I think Pétain wins because I think this is a great moustache. Pétain I'm bringing in here because he takes over, in fact, from Durbal, he takes over 33rd Corps from Durbal. And it's a real, elite is always a difficult word to use about different ones, but it is an elite corps because it has very experienced troops in it who have experience of warfare. And that's because it has the Moroccan division in it, which we'll talk a bit more about later. And they have actually fought. They have actually got people in there who know what fighting's about before the First World War, but they're very experienced. He takes over that corps. You'll see he's also moved from brigade commander, quickly becoming divisional commander, and quickly becoming corps commander. And by September, he's not there in September for the 3rd Artois because he's already an army commander in the Champagne. So he's fighting on the Champagne then. So he goes from brigade commander to army commander within a year. So you can see the sort of movement these people have made because of these gaps created by Joffre getting rid of so much of his general staff. So he's a major player in what's going to be happening in the first part of the Artois, second battle of Artois. Maistre. Now, I'm going into people now who I could go through all the corps commanders, but I won't because there's too many of them and it would just take too much time. But I've picked up Maistre because he is the 21st Corps commander. And that's the corps that's on top of the ridge, the Notre Dame de Lorette. I'll talk about places and areas in a little while. But he's on top of there geographically. That's where his corps is. If you visit that area, if you visit Notre Dame de Lorette, and I'm talking about visiting places at the end of the talk, you'll see his statue up there. A lot of people think it's somebody else up there, but it's not, it's Maistre, because that's where he fought, it's where he's commemorated. He actually goes on to be an army commander at the end of the war. He's quite an able corps commander. You'll see he's also, like Pétain, moved very quickly upwards. He doesn't make army commander as quickly as Pétain, but he's not seen as steady as Pétain. But that's Maistre because he has a statue there. And then I brought him in because he's only a divisional commander. Barbeau is the one seated on the left with what looks like a rather strange hat. That's actually the Alpine beret. It's a very big, floppy. In fact, that's quite a small version of it. You see some that seem incredibly, ridiculously oversized. And you'll see that he's sat next to, and that is Pétain that he sat next to, with a few smiley, happy people behind them, thinking, oh, this is nice being in the photograph. But Barbeau is the savior of Arras, as far as the Artois are concerned. 77th Division in 14, Alex wouldn't have had time to go all of this, but if you look at Arras in 14, it is saved by an ad hoc division that's thrown together in September 14, thrown together from a number of Alpine units, and Barbeau is put in charge of it because you can see he's got an Alpine background. It's actually called Division Barbeau. It hasn't got a number until later on, late September, when it's called 77th Division. But up to that point, it's Division Barbeau. And he basically, with his fighting around Arras, saves Arras, which means he has a monument, which we'll talk about later. 33rd Corps, I said, had the Moroccan division in it. We're going to talk quite a lot about the Moroccan division in the first part of these battles. So a little bit of word about what that is. First of all, the idea that it's full of Moroccans. The Moroccan division didn't have anybody actually who was Moroccan in it. It's called the Moroccan division because it was stationed in Morocco. And so when the French brought all their colonial troops back to France to fight, in the same way we brought regiments and we brought battalions back who were on colonial duty, they brought whole armies back who were on colonial duty, and one of them is the Division Marocain. And it's made up of a number of different elements. And people don't understand that fully, but it's made up of, as you see here, native black North Africans. And they are the tirailleurs. I don't think I pronounced that very well, but that's a word I've never been able to get my head around. that the regiments that are called that, which is actually French for light infantry, were actually the colonial natives. There are also Zouave battalions, the Zouave regiments. They are the colonial French. In other words, they are white French colonial troops. They are put into Zouave regiments. And then there's the Foreign Legion, because one whole big chunk of the Moroccan division was the Foreign Legion. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through the battles. But it's a really mixed up bunch of people. However, that big mix works because it really is one of the best divisions around. And it carries out, as some of you know, if you've been at VB, carries out some astounding stuff. Right. Second Battle of Artois. We'll jump straight into the battles, really. As I said earlier on, Joffre needed an offensive, wanted an offensive, and his idea, his offensive, was going to be in the Artois. And it was going to be basically an attack from the area here is Souchez, and just north of Souchez. This is the road that, if you've been to Arras, it's the road that goes through Souchez and then heads off up towards Lens. So in that Artois area, and Arras is down here. You see, Arras has been held. The French have got it. They've held it. There's a bit of a salient around it, not dissimilar to Ypres in a sense, with the Germans having made a lot of inroads in this direction. But they also have a salient. That's this area here. And the head of that salient is Ablain-Saint-Nazaire and Cancy. And as far as the French were concerned, this was an ideal place to do two things: to attack in order to force the Germans off all the high ground, because this is basically, this area here above Ablain-Saint-Nazaire is the Lorette Ridge, and that bends round onto what is Vimy Ridge. So this is the high ground here, going all the way down towards Talos and so on. Vimy Ridge actually does carry on from what is seen as the Canadian bit now, down towards Talos, and so it's still very high ground there, and he heads off down in this direction to what's called Point de Jour, which is where the cemetery and 9th Scottish Division Memorial is. It runs all the way down here, but it bends a bit to the west when it gets onto the Lorette Ridge. The Germans had got along the Lorette Ridge, and they'd gone through Vimy. They'd taken all of this area here. So the French idea was, if we get them off this high ground here, there's then flat area from there onwards to all the way off to the east. It's just flat. And there's no way they can make a line further back. Even in 17, when the Canadians knocked the Germans off Vimy Ridge, they had to go back 4 miles to make their next line, even though by that time the Germans had multiple lines. They had to go back a long way to get away from that. At this point, the Germans do not have those multiple lines. So they would have had to have gone back probably even further. The French idea was that it wasn't a matter of breakthrough and we're going to win the war. By this point, Joffre was not fixated with the idea of the great breakthrough that will win the war. His idea was to make the Germans give up ground. And by taking the high ground, by taking the Lorette Ridge back, by taking Vimy Ridge, the Germans in Lens and even Lille, further north, would be in problems in terms of their flanks being turned. And so the Germans would move a long way back, give up a lot of French ground, maybe even give up Lens. Now, Lens, geographically, is mining country. And in those days, it was an essential industrial area of France, and the French had lost it. To regain that would have been really important. That's another reason why the Artois region was chosen for an attack. Strategic value to actually gain that land back, even if it was only a matter of gaining about 10 or 20 miles back, not the ridding of the Germans all the way out of France. It could have had strategic value. So the plan, Joffre's plan, 10th Army, number of corps attacking, but the main element of it is this corps here. 21st Corps is up here, that's Meister's Corps. It's on the ridge, just about on the ridge and to the north of it. This is Pétain's Corps, 33rd Corps, with 70th Division, 77th Division, remember that's Barbeau's division, and DM, which is Division Marocain. So that's the Moroccans. Then below that, we have 20th Corps, 17th Corps, 10th Corps around Arras. The idea was there would be partial attacks down here just to try and protect the flank of the major attacks, which are to go from the major attack is 20th and 33rd Corps. They're going to be the major ones. The idea being that 33rd Corps get up onto what is now the Vimy Memorial, the 145, well, we call it 145. For the French, it was 140. It somehow grew between 1915 and 17. But where the Canadian Memorial is on Vimy, that was the objective, get the ridge. And they were to take that northern part of the ridge. 20th Corps were to take the village of Neuville-Salva and the ridge beyond that, the high ridge around Talos and so on. So all the high ground then will be taken by these two corps, protected by the southern corps, and again protected in the north by 21st Corps. And the result was the Germans would have to go. German defenders, mostly the Bavarians. So interestingly, with Ruprecht as commander, 6th Army had a lot of Bavarians in it, and it's the 1st Division, it's the 2nd Reserve Bavarian Corps, I say it easier in German than I can in English, which is made up of the 1st Reserve Division, Bavarian Reserve Division, 5th Reserve Division. So they are in this area here. And they're the defenders. And then 28th Division from, I've forgotten the corps that's up there now, is in the northern part. So there's not a great deal of defensive division-wise. It's only three divisions. They're throwing something like around 8 divisions at 3. Well dug in. They've been there a while, but numerically, the French have a great advantage. And they bring in their ideas. The planning has all the ideas, but not all the way through their planning. Most of the planning, and Petain especially, 33rd Corps, if you go through their operational orders, it talks about a rolling barrage. It talks about all sorts of new ideas. It talks about nettoyage, which is cleaning troops. Now, they weren't going cleaning. It's the ones who are going to mop up, as we call it, the trenches as the attacking troops go through. It took us a couple of years to get the idea of mopping up, but the French had it already in these attacks. Units actually given the task of mopping up. Units are told to ignore strong points, bypass strong points. Now, that's something that you really only read about in 18 sometimes, in terms of, look at how new ways of attacking. We're going to bypass the strong points and troops following up are going to deal with them. That's infiltration tactics. Well, the French already had it in their orders, but it's not comprehensive. You see it patchy. It's only come out really in the early 15, and although 33rd Corps has it fairly ingrained and the Moroccan division has it ingrained, some of the divisions are not quite there yet. And of course, these ideas need training. You can't turn a division from a unit that just attacks willy-nilly with artillery going along with it to one which is going to be trained to follow a creeping barrage and have troops that know how to clean up, mop up trenches after them, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be patchy, but the ideas are all there. And you've got to really think that in that particular case, because the ideas are all there, you've got to give credit to the French. And those ideas pay off. It's the 9th of May, 10 o'clock in the morning. The French don't like early starts. 10 o'clock in the morning, and the artillery's open up. The reason the French tend to start later is that the visibility is not great in the early morning hours around the Artois. I know it, I live in the area. And they wanted visibility for their artillery to see as the attack's going in. And so what they do is they postpone the actual infantry attack till 10 a.m. 10 a.m., they go in. The artillery has been preparing for quite a few days beforehand, but we'll talk about what goes on after we've talked about what happens. And let's just look what is the important part. Because if you notice, I've gone just the north part now of the same map. It's the French map of the out of their history. It's just a really good map. The southern part I've taken out because basically the corps down there attack and fail. It's awful. They go over the top and they're just, every single unit diary talks about the fact that the men go over the top with elan, they go over the top with confidence, and the machine guns and rifle fire just cut them down. 1 or 2 get into the first German trench. Within a few hours, they're forced out by a small counterattack. They're thrown back. It really is a failure. All the commanders talk about artillery not having done its job. Why? Because the wire isn't cut. They don't get through the wire. And also because they don't use a controlled creepy barrage the way it's been told to do. Two of the divisions down there actually have only just arrived from elsewhere. They do not really know about any of the analysis of the previous battles and the new developments that have come around. So the southern part is almost, you could call it, old-fashioned French fighting, and it fails. Further north, you've got this place here, which is Neuville-Saint-Var. Now, it has been turned into an absolute stronghold by the Germans, defensive of the 5th Bavarian Reserve Division. And so the French have some success to start off with. Don't think about the Moroccans, they're a bit more to the north. 39th Division actually get through to the main road that goes up through. If you've been through there, the one that goes through La Targette and heads off towards Souchez, they get through there and they get to the edge of Neuville-Saint-Var and grind to a halt. And that's why you see a line that basically comes around Neuville-Saint-Var. They do not manage to get into the village. And that causes a problem for, well, in the southern part here, it causes a problem for them because they're not getting to the village. It means a lot of flank fire. They don't get through very far. This area right at the bottom that you can see there is termed the labyrinth. And they really did not make any progress into there. It's a labyrinth of trenches. The Germans in many, many stages there, and it just fails to, they fail to make much progress. They do get some progress just south of Neuville-Saint-Var, and they try to outflank the labyrinth, but they don't succeed at this point in time. But the big thing that happens is this one here. The Moroccan division, ignore this line here, because that's where they end up at the end of the day. But on the first day, they're up here. They're on the top. Now, the Moroccan memorial that I'll show you later on is down near the car park, way off the top, way off where the monument is. But that's not where they got to. It's not there because that's as far as they got. They didn't get to the top. They were in the area of where the memorial is, right on top. They even had some men down in Givenchy, which is here. That's down the valley, down off the slope. And so did 77th Division here, Barbeau's division. It also was up here. It had some men getting into the Givenchy. The problem then was, though, the French had actually advanced so far that their reserves were too far back. They'd actually done better to some extent than they expected. They were in too much of a mindset of, oh, let's make sure the reserve, and even in the division itself, the reserve regiment in the division, the Moroccan division, was too far back. It wasn't that the reserve divisions were too far back. They're back here. But even the reserve within the division itself was too far back. That they hadn't quite got there yet. And it's what I would call staff work. They weren't released early enough. They were too far back. So the men who did get on top of here, they weren't forced off straight away. There's a little bit of a myth that they got up there, the reserves didn't arrive, and within no time at all, they were still there in the afternoon of the 9th of May. They were still on top of that. The Germans were in disarray, finding troops where they could dig them up from to try and counterattack the top of Vimy because they'd lost it. If an extra regiment, and a regiment in a French division is basically like a brigade for us, if an extra regiment had got up there, those extra 3-4 battalions might have made all the difference. Similarly for 77th Division. So the two divisions get all the way up here. It's not just the Moroccans, it is the 77th as well. They're up here as well. They're up on the high ground as well. It's not just the Moroccans. So Barbeau is being successful there as well. And it's because those two have really got it sorted out as to how to attack. However, the reserves are too far back. And more importantly than that is that 39th Division have stalled at Neuville-Saint-Var and 7th Division have stalled in their attack south of the Lorette Ridge. Ablain-Saint-Nazaire, the village here, they do not take. Colency, the village here, they do not take. On the first day, they do not advance in this direction. And so the Germans in Souchez and around that area have 77th Division and the Moroccan Division on their flank. And the defenders down here of one regiment of 5th Bavarian Reserve Division have got the flank on the southern part as well. So the men of 77th Division and Moroccan Division who got onto the top were outflanked. They would get enfilade fire from both sides, all the way back down to the ground, to the bottom of the slope, really. And it's the failure of 70th Division that really puts a nail in the coffin for the attacks further south. They don't get into Commercy for 2 more days. So the attack is stalled on the 9th in that area. But look, they do get up to here. 77th Moroccan Division have got this far. They've got almost they've got down the slope a bit, but then you see the line comes back like this. It actually, that at the end of the day, it's back like this. So the result of that is a little bit of an advance up here. There's just some fighting up there, but it doesn't really make much of an advance. Failure here, and great success here, but failure south as well. So you get this enormous success in the middle with failure on either side of it. What the result of that is a lot of continued fighting in May. And this is to give you some idea. If you're in that area at any point, don't just think of it being as one attack and that was it, all done and dusted. The area around Ablain-Saint-Nazaire is fought over for weeks, all the way through May. They're making these slow bits of progress. If you follow this one here, you'll see that basically on the 10th of May, they're down here. It takes until the 23rd of May to get into this area here. They've taken half the village in something like around, 14 days fighting to get halfway through the village. You see they get a little bit further, and the 16th of June, you see it's coming along here. So they've taken a little bit more of the Lorette Ridge. This is where it says you can just about see ND de Lorette, Notre Dame de Lorette. That's the old chapel on top of the ridge. That's where the big cemetery is, I'll talk about later on. The French do take that back by, in a sense, the end of May. Then they've got, before the 16th of June, the Germans actually are in a bit of not in disarray. Their defensive line is, at the end of May, is a bit all over the place. The blue lines are the German trenches at that point. You see some of them go beyond where the French get to. They pull back just before early June. They pull back to a line around here. And so that when there's an attack on the 16th of June, which is a major offensive again on the 16th of June, that attack takes them a little bit further over in the northern part and takes them a little bit further towards Souchez in the southern part. But also down here, you can see again this big bulge. Guess who that is? That's on the 16th of June, the Moroccan division attack Vimy Ridge again. And again, they get almost to the top. But again, they're on their own. So again, they're forced back. But notice that is the line on the morning of the 17th. This time, they actually last a whole day and a half, in fact, up there, almost on top of Vimy Ridge before they're pushed back again. So they actually get up there twice. So if you're ever up there and talk about the monument and say, this is because the Moroccan division got up here, they don't just say they got up here, say they got up here twice. But then they had to fall back. So Second Artois basically comes to an end a couple of days after June 16th. That major offensive doesn't really do much more than that. By this point, though, they've taken Neuville-Saint-Var as a whole village. That's been taken by 5th Division, French 5th Division, which has as its general at this point, a General Mangin, whose name will come up again and again through the next few years, sometimes controversially, sometimes not. But he pushes his troops very hard to finally take the village of Neuville-Saint-Var. So we're going a bit more quickly now. And so we got July, August. Joffre is still wanting to attack. If you remember back to the map of the whole of the Western Front, when it gets to September, when he wants to do a major attack again, it's in 2 places. It's in the Artois again, but it's also in the south on the Champagne. The Champagne attack is much bigger. It's 2.5 armies attacking down there. It's something like around 14 corps. The Artois battle is still 10th Army. It's different divisions. They move different divisions in, different corps in. But it's about the same size as Second Artois. But on the other hand, the French army have committed a lot of troops elsewhere, which could, and more importantly, a lot of artillery elsewhere, heavy artillery especially. And I'm going to look at this in 3 little parts. Third Battle of Artois, 25th September. Anybody who knows their dates know that's also something in the British calendar, because that's the first day of the Battle of Loos. And that's because it's being fought up off the top of the map here as support for this attack. So we're attacking at Loos in order to help out the northern flank of the French attacks here in the Artois at Souchez. So the northern part, 25th September, this third battle does not drag on a great deal. But you'll see that it is successful in taking Souchez. The whole of Souchez falls eventually. These things here are showing it not just on the first day, but after a few days. Souchez falls, and a little bit south of there, 77th Division. Again, it's not Bob Burr's division by now. Unfortunately, he's dead by this point. He's killed on the 10th of May. But they're also successful at getting up here, which is just below the ridge. Just below that, see, that's the 77th Division. You've got 33rd, other parts of 33rd Corps and 3rd Corps who are going for the top of Eby Ridge again. Notice they are quite a way up the ridge compared to where they were down at the bottom of it. They have taken a lot of German ground. 3rd Artois is often seen as an absolute disaster. No, they do not take the ridge. But my God, they don't often leave the British and then the Canadians in a much better position to take the ridge later. That's at the cost of a lot of lives to take that area there. And you notice because they've taken Neuville-Saint-Var, they were able to go a little bit onto the higher ground just above Neuville-Saint-Var. Southern part, same story really. They don't get anywhere. A little bit south of there, you notice that the labyrinth, which is basically over here, has been taken by now. This is not the labyrinth. This is the area on the fast dual carriageway that goes from Arras through towards Lens. This is a dual carriageway which eventually has a motorway going down here now, or dual carriageway going down here now, and has then Talos up here. If you're on that road, though, this is where there's a little lane goes off. Arras Road Cemetery is about here, and Nine Elms is about here. So that is a sort of popular one for British to go along. You're passing not only where the Canadians attacked in 17, but also where the French attacked in 15. So again, the French took a little bit of ground at this particular point here. And then after that particular part of the battle, this area here turned into a big mining exercise, each side trying to mine the other ones into oblivion. But 3rd Artois fails as well in terms of the Germans do not have to make a major withdrawal. But it does set up the situation that the British have in 16, that they don't use because they're basically on the defensive through 16 around the Artois area because we're busy elsewhere. And then in 17, it becomes a major part of where the Canadians and British Third Army attacking the Battle of Arras, which comes up in a couple of weeks' time. But that has all been set up by the French in 2nd and 3rd Artois. Right, so that's basically looked at those battles there. I put that picture up because you asked the question, why did it succeed to a certain extent and then fail? And as far as I'm concerned, that is a picture demonstrating exactly why. And the reason I'm saying that is, just trying to turn the pinpoint up, that is an old-fashioned Filou 155mm heavy gun. If you know anything about artillery at all, you'll notice something is vastly missing from First World War artillery. There's no recoil on it. So when that fires, the whole gun goes backwards, which is why it's got these enormous sledges to dig into the ground, because that's to try and stop it ending up about 100 meters further back. But it means that it has to be aimed again every time it's fired. And that's typical of so much of the heavy artillery. This belongs on a fortress, basically. And it belongs on a fortress where it's attached to the fortress. So basically it doesn't recoil because it just basically, all the shot goes into the stonework of the fortress. But then you put it on a carriage and you try and use it as heavy artillery during this period. The French had to use what they could get hold of. They came out of their Verdun forts. They came out of coastal batteries. They did not have the modern heavy artillery. And that really cost them at 2nd and 3rd Artois, as well as all the way through 15. So they may have got the tactics sorted out. We need heavy guns to disrupt and go into the back of the enemy lines to stop reinforcements coming up. But the technology had not caught up. The ideas they had as infantry were advanced compared to what we think of as 17 and 18. It was almost what we were thinking of 17 and 18. But they couldn't create the platoon tactics that we had in 17 because they hadn't got the light machine guns. They hadn't got rifle grenades. They got grenades, but not rifle grenades. So they hadn't got the technology to develop that much. They could only say, let's work more in loose waves as opposed to almost men standing next to each other. They loosened their infantry attacks, but they did bring in this idea of bypassing strong points, having the people coming in, but their technology had not actually helped. They didn't have the sound ranging technology that comes in later in the war for good counter-battery fire. But they were already in 15 firing gas shells into, this is obviously after the attacks in Ypres, second Battle of Ypres, they were firing gas shells into enemy counter-battery, into enemy battery as counter-battery fire. That was already in use. And as well as that, they had aircraft spotting where those batteries were. So air-ground coordination. But the aircraft were not technologically advanced. Communication was not advanced. How does the plane actually tell the ground where those batteries are? How does it spot when it only has very, very simple radio technology and so on, and other techniques of doing it? So it needed technology to move on. But the theoretical background of the French army already had those theoretical places there. It just needed the technology to put them in place. And of course, tanks, which comes in later, which nobody had thought of in 15. So that's why I put that picture there. Because for me, a lot of where the French fail in 15 is down to the technology is not there yet for them to succeed. But of course, the enemy are doing something as well. The Germans don't sit there after second Artois and say, we managed to hold them back. It was a bit risky and a bit hairy every now and then, but we held them. They said, we do not want to have that experience again. So they thickened their lines. They multiplied their lines. To some extent, the French in 15 is the reason why, when we attack on the Somme in 16, we have so many lines to cross. And I don't mean the 3 or 4 trenches in one section. I mean that once you got through those, you then advance for maybe half a kilometre or so, and you've got another major set of lines. The first line, the second line, the third line that you see if you look at maps of the Somme. Those come out of their experiences with the French in 15. If we do not have a second line and a third line to fall back on, we're going to end up being thrown a long way back. So that's what happens. So when it gets to third Artois, there's a lot of writing in their diaries, a lot of talk of the fact that they get into front lines and the second and third line. They get more into the lines, but then they're counterattacked because the Germans have got more lines, so they have more depth, so they've developed their defensive technique. This idea of a more flexible defensive depth develops in 15 by the Germans. So again, we are suffering in 16 from what the Germans have learned from the French in 15. So third Artois is partially successful, and in the Champagne, they're partially successful, but they're not fully successful because the Germans have learned how to give but not break. So that's basically what my own thoughts on what's going on in this particular year. Landscape. Going off the actual battles now, this is a lovely little painting by somebody. Lovely sort of thing. This is actually out of one of the regiments. It's the 126th Regiment of Infantry. And it's of the area, it's that little lumpy area on the left-hand side is the Lorette, this is near Concy, is the Lorette Ridge in the distance. And so the German trenches are this yellowish line going across here. But doesn't it look sort of like not our usual picture of what it looks like on a battlefield? They've got trees and grass. It's green, but not for long. Because if you look at pictures then of, for example, Neuville-Saint-Va, after it being taken, that's what's left of it. That's all that it looked like. The fighting in there was quite tremendous, quite incredible. And operational orders for the day was sometimes to take a house, and they're all numbered. I don't mean number 5 Acacia Avenue. It was house number 3, house number 24. Your job today to a company would be take house number 24, and that was their task. And it was cellared and tunneled, and was a real. And 5th Division eventually take it, in Novara there is a memorial, not a memorial, plaque to Mangan's 5th Division having taken the village. But that's what it starts to look like. And another example of that comes with the top of the Lorette Ridge after the fighting's finished. This is after the war. The ground has recovered a little bit. The chapel that was there has gone completely, obviously, just a bit of rubble. And you'll see that it's just a fairly blank landscape. No trees, no anything remaining on that anymore. If you visit the area, very quick rush through of what is to visit. That is something you have to go and have a look at. Don't just see it from the car park of the Weimar Memorial if you get to that area. Obviously, go and look at the memorial and all the rest of it. But when you see this across the road from the car park, the memorial, do go across and have a look at it. Have a look at the plaques at the bottom. Because you see that this Morocco division, as I said, had in it not only the various North African troops, either tirailleurs or the Zouaves, those blacks and whites from North Africa, colonial French, but also had the Foreign Legion. And the Foreign Legion has commemoration down here of all sorts of nations, and it goes around the sides as well. You'll see America, Greeks, Italians, Czechs, Poles, all sorts of people memorialized in these plaques at the bottom. So go and have a look. It's been cleaned up. I think there's a photo before it's cleaned up. It's been cleaned up really nicely now. The French have cleaned it up. So that's a really nice thing to go and look at. Also, whilst you're in that northern area, you must go up to the Lorette Ridge. This is what's on the Lorette Ridge now. It's got a basilica, which is obviously a large church-like type of thing, and the lantern tower. There's a lantern at the top of there. If you go past at night, you'll see the lantern shining. That is now a memorial hall. It's got large numbers of plaques to individuals and to units, and it also has a window that was given to it by the British. So it has a little bit of a memorial from the British. And that is, the lantern tower is one of the 7 ossuaries. Because it's got, and of course, there's the cemetery around that area as well. Basically, Notre-Dame-de-Lorette has 39,000, nearly 40,000 men in it, not memorialized. There's 40,000 men in either the cemetery or the 7 ossuaries. The lantern tower is one of them. There are some in there, but most of them are around the ossuary and behind, off to the left of the picture, behind where the photograph's been taken. So the 20,000 of those 40,000 are in the 7 ossuaries. And the ossuaries are all actually called after French generals. So they're not just numbered, they're called after things. There's also, off the camera to the left, a large plot for Muslims. Because the Muslims can't have a cross. They have a slightly rounded shaped thing, headstone, and pointing a little bit differently to the rest, so they can they have to point eastwards. But they memorialize that faith as well. So that's something that is a real must. And while you're in that area, just further down the road, back down towards Souchez, is Maestras. That's General Maestras thing. And in the background, you can see the new memorial, the ring of remembrance, which actually has on it something like about 750,000 names inscribed on the inside of it. It's quite awe-inspiring to go around. It's all the dead of the Nord-Pas-de-Calais area. So it's not the Somme, it's not Ypres, it's not Belgium, it's not further down in Verdun and all this, it's not all the French casualties further down, it's the Nord-Pas-de-Calais, which is basically from the north of the Somme all the way up to the coast in France, but not in Belgium. And that's already 750,000. That's all nationalities next to each other, just the name. So it's all 750,000 names. Again, somewhere that's good to go around. Great to go around. Just on our little trip around, what you can see, whilst you're in the Lorette, whilst you're there, you can see in the cemetery, actually, Ernest Barbeau's grave. It's the first one on the left when you go in, so it's a nice one to visit. And that's his memorial on the way down in Souchez. It's the memorial to him and the 77th Division. So that's him on the way down. This is why I mentioned some of these people. He's very much a hero in Arras for obviously saving the town in 14. On the way between Souchez and down towards Arras, you pass these 2 memorials opposite each other. The Polish Memorial, Czech Memorial. Why? Because I've just said they were in the Foreign Legion. Polish Memorial is a memorial to the Polish who fought in the First World War only. It's not connected to the Second World War whatsoever. It's the Poles who were fighting. They're basically called the Bayonets because they were centred. The Polish community was centred in Bayonne, in France, and they fought as part of the Foreign Legion and had quite heavy casualties on the 9th of May and subsequent days. They are buried mostly in French cemeteries. So you can find Poles, if you're very good, you can find them in Notre-Dame-de-Lorette and La Targette cemeteries, you'll see in a moment. You find Poles there. The Czechs, however, they did it differently. They had one company of men called the Nazdar Company, which sounds like something out of a science fiction film, but they were the Nazdar Company, and that's actually Czech for hello. It's a bit weird because it's what they used to shout when they went into the attack. I find it a bit strange the thought of people coming over the top, coming at me, shouting at the top of their voice, hello, hello, and wanting to kill me. But it's a bit strange. Anyway, that was their call, and that's why they were called that. 250 men attacked on the 9th of May in the Foreign Legion. 50 dead, 150 wounded. So what they've done, the Czechs, as well as a memorial to the men, it's a memorial to all the Czechs from the First and Second World War. And so in the cemetery, I think there are 50 First World War graves, 70 Great War graves, and 136 Second World War graves. And they've been collected from all the cemeteries from around the area. So they've collected theirs together, their dead together. Just further down the road, if you look down one of the roads off the main road down to Arras, you'll see the British La Targette cemetery, but behind it, you see the French La Targette cemetery. Now, remember, you've just been on Notre-Dame-de-Lorette and seen something like 20,000 graves and another 20,000 in mass graves. Here you've got, and the La Targette is just 11,500 men in there, of which nearly 4,000 are in mass graves. So another massive cemetery. It really does tell you what fighting went on here during that period of time. And again, there's an area set aside for Muslims. Oh, it won't go on. No. A little bit further down the road, you pass this area, this place. This is the Maison Blanche German cemetery. And within it, just for interest in terms of fighting, it has got a couple of remains of bunkers. But what is more impressive is the number of crosses. It just goes on and on and on. Maison Blanche is just short of 45,000 men in that German cemetery, 8,000 of which are in mass graves. But if you take 8,000 away, that means there are 36,000 men buried in the burial part. Ignore the mass grave bit. Each one of these crosses, most of these crosses, have 4 names on them. Not because they mass buried 4 people in every one. It's because there were twice as many crosses. It must have been, and I've got pictures of that, which I'm not put on here because we're not fully in the tourist area here. It's immense. And the crosses just seem to go on forever. And it's a place to visit. And if you're in the area, you must visit this place as well. And really, as a sort of last thing now, is this. It doesn't look like this particularly now. I've used an old photograph of the Torch of Peace in Navarre-Saint-Var. It's you see it from the main road. It's surrounded by a wall now, and you can't see much around it. This is how it was originally. And it's basically a memorial to the village. And it's basically represents a hand coming out of the ruins of the village, holding a torch for peace. And the bracelet around the hand is a typical French military bracelet, and it actually has on it Navarre-Saint-Var, 9th of May, 1915. And what it's saying is that it wasn't really the start, it wasn't the date of their liberation, but it was the start of their liberation, but also the start of it being destroyed. But it's a sort of phoenix from the ashes type idea. But the houses behind are interesting because they were actually built by a man called Ernest Petit. He was a philanthropist, and he saw Navarre-Saint-Var, he came from the area, saw what that was like, and realized that a lot of ex-servicemen couldn't afford many of the new houses being built. So he built about, I think, 20 houses and sold them for something like about 10% of what their real worth was. But you had to be a veteran to buy one. And it was called the Cité des Mutilés. And if you walk down the road that's next to the Torch of Peace, today, Some of the houses are those original houses, and they have names on them like Pétain and Bing, interestingly. So if you want to go and visit that house Bing, it's down the road that goes alongside of that particular. It's in fact Rue de 11 November. So it's the 11th of November road, and it goes down by there. So you go and have a look at that. But I want to finish with what's inscribed on the other side of that memorial, because it sums up what the people here felt about this particular set of battles. And in French, but translated, is inscribed, "You, the living who pass by this torch, raised above the bloody battlefield, survey this ground replete with graves, and think of our dead, whose hearts were good." So, whistle-top through a whole year of Artois. But I hope you got an idea of that and an idea of what was going on. And I think I've touched on the reasons why I think they failed as such. But if you want to question any of the other parts of why it might have done, we can go on with that with discussion now.